Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is suicide among African Americans. And we have with us to talk about suicide among African Americans, Dr. CPoe. Dr. Poe is a psychiatrist as well as a minister. And of course, Dr. Poe, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you. Very good to be here.
And to tell you, Dr. Poe, how delighted we are to have you. As a matter of fact, we've received so many compliments from the last show that you did with us dealing with crime and violence. And we felt that suicide is so close to violence. It might be a silent kind of violence that we wanted to talk to somebody about it. And of course, in almost every area, your name came up, and we wanted to bring you back in to talk about suicide among African Americans. But before we get into that, Dr. Poe, let's have you to talk about Dr. Poe himself, to give us some information about your background and some of the things that, in a real sense, certifies and qualifies you as a person to deal with some of the issues that you're dealing with this morning.
Thank you very much. Dr. Haney, I'm a psychiatrist and also a minister. Here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm in private practice, and I work with primarily an elderly population. I guess it was about 2 years ago now that the Lord led me to form a group called the Committee for the Study of Violence and Health. And we went into the Metro Jail and did assessments of 25 inmates to see if we could gain a better understanding of why some people choose violence as a lifestyle. The unique thing about that research is that it involved a spiritual assessment along with a psychological, sociological, and psychiatric assessment. In addition, I've been involved in prison ministry off and on for about the last 15 years. I've been involved with the Nashville Union Mission. I would call it a homeless ministry for about 15 years, and I've been a psychiatrist since 1970.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Poe, what we'd like to talk about this morning is suicide among African Americans. But before we get into suicide among African Americans, let's look at suicide as a general problem, because whether you're African American or whatever, it is a problem. And let's talk about suicide, and then later on we'll talk about the prevalence among African Americans. Let's talk about suicide.
Well, suicide is a big problem. As a matter of fact, you might be surprised that based on some statistics that was done in 1995, there were 22,000 murders recorded throughout the nation, but there were 31,000 suicides. And of course, suicides are usually underreported. For obvious reasons, for insurance reasons, and also to avoid the shame that's often associated with the family member killing themselves. Then there are covert suicides. We know that some people precipitate their own death. And so persons who are on the receiving end of a homicidal attack sometimes have set themselves up to be killed. All right? We also know that some car accidents are covert suicides. So in terms of accurate statistics on just how big of a problem suicide is, we really don't know, but it's a very big problem in our nation.
Very big problem. And of course, when we look at suicide among the national population, what are some of the things that you can say about that as an issue?
Well, according to the National Center for Healthcare Statistics of the Department of Health and Human Services, about approximately 31,000 persons in the U.S. commit suicide every year. 31,000. Now, based on data that was obtained in 1997, 27,000 of those were Caucasians. About 3,000 of those were non-white. Of the 27,000 that were Caucasian, 22,000 were male Caucasian, and about 5,700 were female Caucasian. 1,748 were Afro-American males, and about 339 were Afro-American females. So the prevalence of suicide is very high among the Caucasian population and very high among the Caucasian male population. Yes. Now, considerably low among Afro-Americans, but we are catching up. We are catching up. As a matter of fact, the incidence or the prevalence of the suicide rate among Afro-Americans has doubled, particularly in the 15 to 19-year old age group in the last 20 years.
And of course, Dr. Poe, I know that there are the warning signs and all of those other things that you know about it, but it is still a very intriguing question to me as to why people engage. I mean, what are some of the causes of these suicides? I think you've indicated that some are covert and some are, but now, what would you say as a psychiatrist that would generally motivate an individual to take his own life, whether it's outright or whether it's in a covert fashion?
Okay, that's a very good question. Our thinking now, well, let me give you these statistics also. We know that females attempt suicide 3 times more often than males, but males actually commit suicide 3 to 4 times more often than females. We know that there seems to be a relationship between depression and suicide. Of course, we also know that females are more often depressed. But what we're just beginning to recognize is that despair, or a sense of hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness, and powerlessness, is, I believe, a much better predictor of suicide. And therefore, males, we are more prone to despair. Okay, less prone to depression, but more prone to despair and paranoia. And therefore, we're more prone to actually complete a suicide, whereas females are more prone to attempt. We're more prone to actually complete a suicide.
As a psychiatrist, when you say that a person is more prone to despair rather than to depression, now how would you define within a psychological point, from a psychological point of view, what is really meant by despair?
Right. Well, I think despair is a condition of the body, mind, and spirit. I think it primarily is a byproduct of self-centered behavior. It's a byproduct of me mistreating other people. It's a byproduct of me rejecting the authority of God in my life. It's a byproduct of me being determined to have my own way or determined to do my own thing. And the result of that then is guilt, unresolved guilt. Okay? The unresolved guilt, as long as it remains unresolved, will eventually become despair. Now, despair, as I said, is a condition of the body, mind, and spirit in which I feel hopeless, I feel helpless, I feel worthless, I feel powerless, I feel unloved, I feel inferior, I feel inadequate, and the other negatives, all right? And so in that condition, and by the way, a condition of despair is also a condition of rage, okay? In that condition, I'm liable to hurt myself even more and or I'm liable to hurt other people. For example, people who are in a condition of despair, they often will manifest being suicidal. But if a person's in a condition of despair, they are as potentially homicidal and potentially homicidal and suicidal as they are potentially suicidal.
And so not only is that individual a threat to himself, but he's also a threat to a general society.
That's correct. That's correct.
And so there's a cycle that you're talking about here that are practically all negatives. Here, Dr. Poe, how do you break that cycle? I mean, what are some of the solutions in terms of identifying individuals and breaking that cycle?
Yes, that's a very good question. A condition of despair or a condition of rage is a spiritual condition that affects the body and the mind and the spirit in one's relationship. Now, I'm convinced that, well, we use a lot of things to try to resolve that. We use medication. We sometimes use hospitalization because in that condition, oftentimes people have psychiatric problems. They sometimes will hear voices. They sometimes will feel very anxious. They sometimes will become depressed, all right? We use medication. Sometimes we use hospitalization. Sometimes people try to rest. But the fact of the matter is only God, only the Spirit of God can remove a condition of despair. So therefore, the answer to despair is simply a drawing closer to God. It is simply a turning to God and attempting to live the way He wants us to live.
And therefore, you can even break that cycle with that kind of spiritual relationship.
Yes.
And of course, Dr. Poe, we're getting ready for our first commercial break, after which time we'll come back and we'll deal with other aspects of this issue of suicide. But in the meantime, we'll encourage our audience to be patient with us, and we'll come back in a few seconds for the second segment of this show for today. Is suicide among